but he only got a very brief glance at the man, and it wasn't even totally certain that the man he saw was talking to Catherine Eddowes.
At 1:45 in the morning, PC Watkins of the City Police walked his beat here into Mitre Square. The only noise he heard was the sound of his own footsteps. He'd walked this way 15 minutes previous and found the square to be quite deserted. Little now seemed to have changed as he shone his lantern into the square's dark recesses. But when the beam fell upon the spot in the square's south corner, it illuminated a horrific sight: the mutilated body of Catherine Eddowes.
The injuries that Catherine sustained were really horrific in Mitre Square. She had her throat cut from left to right, right back to the spinal column. The murderer then ripped her up to the breastbone, disemboweled her, took away her kidney. He then placed her intestines over the shoulder. But not only that, to her body he actually disemboweled her, of course, which happened to most of the victims, but it was her facial injuries which were sort of really notorious, because he cut off the section of her nose, he partially severed her ear, he slashed her face continuously, and then also had V-shaped triangular flaps underneath her eyes, just there.
In the early hours of the 9th of November, 25-year-old Mary Kelly was heard singing in a room at number 13 Miller's Court. A little before 2 a.m, a casual labourer named George Hutchinson met her on Commercial Street. She asked if he would lend her sixpence. He told her that he had no money. Observing that she'd just have to find it some other way, Mary Kelly continued along the street. A man coming from the opposite direction tapped her on the shoulder. She turned and spoke with him. They started laughing, and Mary Kelly took the man by the arm and led him back along Commercial Street, walking straight past Hutchinson. He later recalled how the man stared at him in a sinister fashion. Mary Kelly led the man along Dorset Street and into Miller's Court. Hutchinson waited outside for 45 minutes, but when nothing happened, he left the scene. Shortly before 4 a.m, two of Mary's neighbours heard a soft cry of murder, but since such cries were a common occurrence in the area, they both ignored it.
At 10:45 a.m. on the 9th of November 1888, Mary Kelly's landlord, John McCarthy, sent his assistant, Thomas Bowyer, round to number 13 Miller's Court to collect her overdue rent. Moments later, an ashen-faced Bowyer returned. "Governor," he stammered, "I knocked on the door. I could not make anyone answer. I looked through the window and saw a lot of blood." The two men hurried back to Miller's Court, where, looking through the broken window, John McCarthy gazed upon an horrific sight. The bedside table was covered with what appeared to be lumps of human flesh, and there, on the bed, barely recognizable as human, lay the mutilated body of Mary Kelly.
Soon, Inspectors Walter Dew and Walter Beck had arrived at the scene, and by 11:30 a.m, Inspector Aberline had joined them. But amazingly, it would be another 2 hours before any of them entered Mary Kelly's room.
There was a delay between Mary Kelly's body being discovered by Thomas Bowyer, who'd gone there to collect the rent, and the police actually entering the room, because somebody mistakenly believed that bloodhounds were going to be brought to the scene. And in fact they weren't, but they didn't know that. And it was only when a senior officer came along and said that there were going to be no bloodhounds that the police finally forced the door and entered the room.
They couldn't actually get into the room because for some reason they thought the murderer must have had the key and locked the door. So in fact, when the people actually got into the room, they actually had to knock it down with an axe. They had to use a pickaxe to get into the room.
John McCarthy, Mary Kelly's landlord, was no doubt giving vent to the feelings of all who witnessed the bloody carnage inside number 13 Miller's Court, when later that day he told a reporter, "The sight that we saw, I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked more like the work of a devil than the work of a man. The whole scene is more than I can describe. I hope I may never see such a sight again."
Mary Kelly had her throat cut from left to right, right back to the spinal column, just like the other victims. She was stabbed, ripped up from the rectum to the breastbone, disemboweled, various organs were taken away. Apart from her body, her face was almost hacked beyond recognition. Her ears were cut off, her nose, her eyebrows, her lips. Complete disfigurement of the corpse took place in Miller's Court.
At noon on Monday the 19th of November, the bell at St Leonard's Church in Shoreditch began to toll a morning knell as a coffin of elm and oak was carried out of the gates in front of a crowd some several thousand strong. Men and women alike could barely control their emotions as the funeral procession set off for St Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leighton. It was with great difficulty that the police forced a path for the cortege, as onlookers jostled to touch the coffin and read its simple brass plate, Marie Jeanette Kelly, died 9th of November 1888, aged 25 years.